Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. Today's video is going to be all about following a 1930s pattern and turning it into two Valentine's Day themed dresses. Now, as someone who isn't in a relationship and isn't even close to being in a relationship, Valentine's Day isn't something that I usually celebrate or have that much interest in. But if anything is going to get me interested in Valentine's Day, it is going to be mid-century fashion. I recently saw a pattern over on eBay for a simple 1940s shirtwaist, but it had a really sweet little heart applique over the chest, and I just thought it was an adorable idea for a dress. And since then, I've actually seen quite a few original garments that also have heart appliques on them. Those dresses weren't really in my size range or my price range, and I actually didn't even end up buying that pattern that inspired this, but I thought I could do my own little twist on it using a pattern that I already had in my collection. However, I couldn't decide what direction to go in, whether I wanted it to be a white dress with the applique, maybe a little bit of cute red trim, or whether I wanted to make it out of a ditzy, more traditionally 1930s print. And in the end, I decided to make both. So that's what this video is about, and I'm just going to dive into it, and I really hope that you enjoy. It is currently 8 o'clock at night, and I just drew on eyebrows for this video, so I am thoroughly committed to this. I'm sure I had a proper intro before this because this isn't a great way to start anything, but this is when the progress on this piece is actually starting. I'm going to be making two dresses based off of this Hollywood pattern, and it is number 1506, and it is based off of something Mary Carlisle wore in a Paramount film probably around the 1930s or 40s. And Hollywood Patterns is actually a line of patterns that were based off of garments that young actresses and starlets wore. And if I can find any photos of what this was inspired by, then I will try and link them in the description box down below. But my versions are going to be Valentine's Day themed, and I took a little trip to Joann's today to get everything that I need. I'll show you the fabrics I got in a sec, but can we talk about how adorable this reusable bag is? The straps is a sewing ruler. It's adorable! It totally matches my sewing room. How could I not buy it? So I got two main fabrics for this project because I am making two of these dresses. And the first one is this Valentine's Day collection cotton, and this is a quilted cotton. It's a relatively high quality one by Joann's standards. And from a distance, it just looks like a polka dot. Even at this distance, it kind of looks like a polka dot. But it's actually a very small red heart print over a pale pink backdrop. And I just really, really liked this. I thought it was very sweet and that the proportions worked really well for something that was 1930s themed. I also purchased 4 or 5 yards of this white cotton. While I was there, I also bought some double cotton gauze from the baby section that was on clearance. This feels so nice, and I'm going to turn these into blouses at some point during the summer. And then I got some grosgrain ribbon for waistbands, and then I purchased 4 cards of these really cute buttons. They're supposed to be $1 each, but they're actually $2 each, which is ridiculous. But it's too late to change that. So I've got 2 that are in this darker fuchsia color, and then 2 that are in this pastel pink. I don't know which color I'm going to end up using, but I think I'm going to use the heart buttons on the heart fabric, and then I'm going to use some red buttons on the white fabric. So these are also from Sunline. They're just more basic red buttons, and they're nice and shiny. I think they'd be really great for this project. And then I have a belt buckle, which is vintage, and something I got from my great aunt, which will match really nicely as well. And then I'd really like to incorporate some rickrack into this as a fun twist. I just picked this up from an estate sale, and it's the exact color I want it to be, and if I can incorporate this somehow, maybe in bands around the hem, without it looking ridiculous, then I'm definitely going to do so. Now, I have to count all of the pieces for this pattern. I got them all laid out, but I haven't counted them yet, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And as I said, this fabric has been pre-washed, so I'm ready to get cutting into it, and I'm probably not going to film a whole lot of chatty bits tonight just because it's pretty late for me to be pretty chatty, but I'm sure I'm going to film more tomorrow, and hopefully I have lots to update you on then. So I know I said I wasn't going to be chatty, but I changed my mind. I'm currently about halfway done with cutting out the pattern, and I'm cutting out both layers at a time. So I've got the white fabric laid underneath the pink fabric, and I just figured it'd be faster and easier to cut them both out at once, so that is what I am doing. And I'm cutting them out with pinking shears because this fabric kind of has overlapping pieces that are top stitched together. It's called lapped seams, and it isn't sewn like a traditional seam, which means I can't sew it as French seams. So my only alternative for finishing the edges would be serging, which I'm not going to do because it's not set up, or binding them. And I really don't want to add bulk to lap seams because I don't think it's going to look as nice. So I'm just going to pink them, and I think that will be good enough because this is pretty lightweight cotton. And lightweight cotton, the edges kind of fuzz up when they're cut with pinking shears after a few times through the wash and a couple of wears, and it ends up almost finishing itself. So it doesn't look super pretty from the interior, but it creates a pretty sturdy garment. Actually, I think all of my original dresses from the 1940s just have seams that were pinked, and they're doing perfectly fine, despite being many years old at this point. And it was a very acceptable finish up into the 1960s, and even now on some patterns you'll see them recommend it. Also, I had quite the adventure getting this fabric today. It was the longest drive I've done by myself. So if you remember a couple of vlogs ago, I was talking about how I just got my driver's license and what a cluster crap that whole experience was. Since getting my license, I've made lots of trips to the bank and to the grocery store. And I've also taken the dogs to the vet and done like several 20-ish minute in each direction types of drives. But I haven't done any drives longer than that on my own. But today I did about 2 hours of driving. So I went to the psychiatrist and Joann's and a thrift store, and then I came home and I didn't die. It was a very successful trip all around. The thrift store though, I haven't been to that one in a long time, and it is so bad. All of the thrift stores around where I live are so bad. They're really, really expensive. Like, they have t-shirts covered in paint that are like $8. And then they have like tattered old suits and pants that are like $18, and it just is so not a deal to buy anything from there. And they don't have any fabric, they don't have any curtains. They have some bedspreads, but they're really, really grubby. Like, I do not even want to take them home to wash them. And it just has a smell to it. Like, I have nothing against buying items that are used at all, but I just really don't like the thrift stores around where I live. They're expensive, the selection sucks, and it's just not a nice browsing or shopping experience. Also, I tried to cut all of this out with these new pinking shears because I went to an estate sale recently and I got these shears, and I also got all of these cute little pattern weights. And they feel like they were really expensive, wonderful pinking shears, but they get gummed up really easily. I don't know if you can tell, but they're curved. So they just get to a point in the fabric where they don't want to go any further, and it's very frustrating because they feel like they should be really, really nice. If anyone has any good pinking shear recommendations, then please let me know, because I have a plastic pair from Amazon, which is okay, and then I've got the scallop pair, which is also okay, but I really like a very nice pair that cuts really smoothly when I'm doing garments like this where there are a lot of pieces that need to be cut out with pinking shears. I also want a pinking machine, but that has a different purpose. I also just wanted to address and kind of comment on a lot of the comments I got on my last video, which was a New Year's resolution / sewing vlog. And in that video I talked about what I wanted to accomplish in 2019, and I also talked a little bit about my mental state in 2018 and how it wasn't great. And though I didn't mean for that to be the focus of the video at all, it was definitely the focus of the majority of the comments that I got. And all of the comments were really sweet and really supportive, and thank you very, very much. They're really kind. But I also just wanted to clarify the fact that a lot of you thought my resolutions were too much and that I was taking on too much and I was just going to make myself more stressed. And I just wanted to say that I may have phrased them as resolutions, but in my head, and I thought I mentioned this in the video, but I probably forgot, they weren't so much resolutions as they were things I wanted to keep in mind moving forward. Healthy habits that I knew would benefit me if I could stick to them, but if I didn't stick to them, then I wasn't going to beat myself up over it. And also, everything I mentioned, except for exercising, are things that I already do and have to do. Like, I obviously keep my space somewhat clean, and I obviously respond to emails eventually, and I have to do accounting at some point because taxes. So they're all tasks that I have to do at some point, and my resolutions were more about being more on top of those tasks so anxiety surrounding them doesn't build up. So I'm really not taking on anything new. They're just things that I want to be more mindful of moving forward. So hopefully that clears it up and you guys are less worried. I'm sorry if it came off as if I was trying to take on the world. I didn't really see it that way, but I guess I could see how other people would. But trust me, I'm very much okay with my resolutions, and they're not stressing me out in the slightest. So I'm kind of completely ignoring the instructions and just working on the parts that I want to work on right now. That is 9 p.m. logic for you. So I pin the pockets together, and basically you fold the bottom edge of the pocket facing inward by 1/2 inch, and then you pin it so the wrong side of the pocket is facing the right side of the pocket facing, and then the pocket facing is going to fold outward and be top stitched to the right side. And in the case of the white pockets, I'm going to insert a little bit of this eyelet lace into that edge, and I'm also going to top stitch some of the rickrack on top. I should probably soak the rickrack first just to make sure that it won't bleed, so I'm probably going to do that. And I've also just repeated this whole process with the heart pockets as well. And they're not going to get any trims because I think the fabric speaks for itself. And I've also inserted some of that eyelet lace into the edges of the sleeve pieces, which is an option that they actually present in the pattern. So I'm going to top stitch the lace on and then sew the actual seam, except for the case of the heart one, which once again, not getting any lace, so I can just sew these normally. I've also pinned together the collar for the heart layer, and I'm going to sew lace into one of these sides of the cotton version. They're both cotton, but one's white and one isn't. You're going to see what I mean. It's going to look great. It's just really difficult to explain at this point. And how they wanted me to start was by sewing all the front seams, as shown in this diagram. But that seems like an awful lot of work, so I'm going to do what I feel like doing instead. So I have spent most of my day working on an 18th century costume, but I'm also working a little bit on this, or these two, since I'm making two of these dresses. I got everything cut out last night, and then I got all of the edges for the front and back pieces folded inward. And those edges have to be folded inward because they lap over the side bodice panels as well as the side skirt panels. And I've got the side skirt panels sewn in place, and I will show you those in just a minute. And now I am gathering the side bodice panels so they fit the waist dimension. So this edge has to fit into this edge, which means it needs to be gathered down pretty significantly. I haven't done a fitting with it yet, so I'm hesitant to say that this has gone well, but so far it appears to be going okay. I haven't had any major catastrophes. I'm just gathering this down with running stitches about a ½ inch away from the edge. Just going to gather it so these notches line up. That looks perfect. Tie that off, and then I shall pin it. And I'm pinning this just by matching up the raw edges. And it's easier to match them up from the back, but when you're actually sewing it, you want the pins to be on the front. So I'm kind of just switching between sides of the fabric to make sure that everything is as it should be. That's one side down, and now I'm just going to repeat this on the other. The red version is a little bit more forgiving because the fabric isn't sheer, so if stuff lines up, or rather doesn't line up perfectly, you won't really be able to tell. But with this one, since you can kind of see shadows of the seam allowance through the fabric, since it's quite sheer, any inaccuracies will be very obvious. I'm trying to be a little bit more careful than I usually would be. Now for the back panel, it's a very similar process, it's just not as fiddly. It doesn't have to be gathered down because it fits perfectly. So now these pieces can be top stitched together, and I can repeat that with the red fabric. I just have to make sure to change my thread in between, which is honestly super annoying, but luckily this won't be a super time consuming project. At least I don't think it will be, so hopefully that annoyance will be over soon. So it is now a couple days later, and I've pretty much finished the white dress. It just needs to be hemmed, and I've done a terrible job of documenting this. I wasn't quite sure what direction I wanted to go in when it came to trimming these dresses, so I decided I would sort of get that figured out off camera, and then I became very concerned that these dresses wouldn't fit. Though they're made for a size 18, they only have a 39-inch hip measurement, which is a little on the tight side for me. And I realized that it was quite long-waisted, which means that the hips are going to sit kind of over my widest point. So I was really worried that these wouldn't end up fitting, in which case it was sort of silly to make a video about them. So I decided to move forward with the white dress, and then once I did the fitting with that, I was confident enough that this one would work out that I decided to resume filming, which is what I'm doing now. And I will take you through what I did on the white dress and what I did differently on the white dress. And I'll also try and document the process of making the heart one a little bit better. So right now, I am just hemming the sleeves. I used my iron to turn the hem inward by ½ inch, and then I turned it inward by another ½ inch. So that creates a rolled ½ inch hem. And now I'm just whip stitching the edge down so it looks nice and pretty. And then I have to gather the top of the sleeves, and I'll show you how I do that in just a sec. I've changed my gathering method for sleeves. I used to kind of set the bottom half of the sleeve and then gather the cap portion in place to fit the arm side, but now I gather it before setting the sleeve and just leave one end of the thread untied off and very long so I can pull it to adjust the gathers, which is what you're supposed to do. I've just never liked that method as much, but I've seen the light and now I think it's better. So yeah, so far today I've been working on my 18th century robe a la Française, and that video is coming up next week. I think it's going up on the 14th. I've gotten so many questions about that dress, and no offense to anyone who's asked, because I'm not bothered, but when you ask about a costume, it doesn't make me post about it any faster. And just because I haven't posted about a costume in a week and a half doesn't mean that I'm never going to post about it again. It's kind of crazy, some of the comments I've gotten on every other video I've posted except for the second part of that. Also, the lighting is really bad here, so maybe I will just do this quite quickly and then update you when I'm done. Also, I just notched the fabric where the gathering begins and ends, so now I'm just going to use running stitches, and one end of the thread is tied off, the other end is just going to be left loose so I can adjust it. So those are the two sleeves hemmed and gathered, and now I'm just going to iron these, and then I will be back when this lighting is less terrible. Actually, please bear with me in this horrible lighting for one more minute. I'm just going to go ahead and sew up the shoulder seams of the dress. So this is the back panel, and I'll show you it in more detail in a minute. Then this is the front panel, and I'm just going to sew across the shoulder seams and then give that an iron as well. Okay, hopefully the lighting and the angle is a bit better now. I just organized some lace while I was waiting for the sun to go down. I recently got so much lace from estate sales, and even before that, my organization system for lace was just not working. I purchased a whole bunch of these canvases. They're like panel canvases, so they're just really hard cardboard covered with canvas paper. These are the Applique brand ones, and I think I'm going to bolt all my lace onto that so I can see all of it, and it will just be very clear what I have, because I purchased all of my own fabric, but most of my lace has been gifted to me, or I purchased it in big lots or from estate sales, so I'm not entirely sure what lace I have, and it's stored in so many different containers that I've never seen it all laid out, and I really don't know what I own, and it makes it very annoying when I'm trying to pick something for a project. And I realized that it was a total first world problem, but it's true. And I just pinned this onto the wrong side of the fabric, so let me fix that. Actually, before I start pinning that on, I'll just show you some of the details of this. So this was assembled entirely with lapped seams, which means all of the edges of these front panels were turned inward by a ½ inch and then top stitched over the side panels. Also, for the pink version, I decided to get a little bit decorative with the pockets. So I inserted some pink lace trim, and then I made these little bows out of satin ribbon, and I just singed the ends with a lighter so they won't fray, and then I put one of those cute decorative buttons in the middle. And I have pockets on both sides, obviously. So that is what it's looking like so far, and I've got the front and the back panel completely assembled, and now it's just time to add the collar and the sleeves and the zipper and all of that good stuff. So this is the facing for the front, and I just want to get it lined up properly. And I'm very glad that I noticed I was about to sew it onto the wrong side before I actually sewed it onto the wrong side. And actually, before sewing this on, I have to tuck the collar underneath. So the collar is laid with the right side facing outward, pinned about 1/4 inch away from the center line. And I've totally completely spaced on what I was saying earlier. I think I just said that I purchased a whole bunch of notions from a tailoring supply company, so you get starting on an 1830s riding habit. I'm really excited about that. I also just got an email about my next project for McCall's, so I get to start working on that. And I actually get to make it out of stash fabric for once, which is really nice, because I've been trying not to buy as much fabric this year, and of course, like, paid work is an exception to that because sometimes I just don't have what I need on hand, but it's nice to be able to get some fabric out of my room instead of buying some fabric specifically for it. I also have a personal 1830s project, or 1820s project rather, that I'm about to start on. I'm really looking forward to that too. Hopefully I can get started on that tonight, but I should probably finish the 18th century dress first. So anyway, that is all pinned, and now I'm just going to sew a ½ inch away from this edge around the neckline, and then I'm going to pivot right here, and I'm going to stitch all the way down to here, then back up to here, and then continue around. So that is going to sew in the facing, and then it can just be folded inward. So I'm going to sew that on, and then I will be back. Now I'm just going to take a little bit of thread binding, and for this back portion that doesn't have a facing, I'm just going to top stitch this right against the seam allowance, or right against the stitch line. So now I'm going to cut the slash open in the front of the bodice, and that's done just by stitching straight down here, and then clipping the corners. There's a pin hiding in there, which is why I couldn't clip that corner. and I'm just going to fold that inward and then iron it inward. I also mentioned that before sewing this on, I folded all of the edges inward by 1/2 inch using my iron. It's much easier to do that before than it is to do it after. I'm also just going to fold that seam binding inward, and that finishes the edge of the collar that isn't covered by the facing, in case that wasn't clear. So as I said, today I've mostly been working on the 18th century project. It's almost done. I've just got a little bit more trim to make, like 2 yards more trim to make. I've got some trim to sew on tonight, and then I have a hat to make, and then it will be done, which is good because a video's due in like 3 days, and I haven't started editing it yet. I've been working on these dresses instead. That's okay. I have great confidence it'll get finished. I was gonna brag and say I'd never missed a deadline, but I don't want to jinx myself because I have a few coming up. Also talking a little bit about how I've been good in trying not to buy as much fabric this year. I've made 1 order from Fabric Mart. Actually, I've made 2 orders from Fabric Mart, but they were like within a day of each other, so it barely counts as 2 orders. And then I purchased the fabric from Joann's that you saw, and I purchased some notions from an estate sale, and I purchased the tailoring supplies, obviously. But I really haven't purchased that much fabric, at least not as much fabric as I purchased kind of in a month last year, so I'm pretty pleased with myself. And I'm trying to use up as much fabric as I buy in a month, so I'm not going to limit myself from purchasing fabric when there's a project that I'm excited about, but I am going to try and make a conscious effort to look through my own fabric first and see if it's appropriate before purchasing anything, because I really do want to start moving through my stash. Since I have so many fabrics I love, it's just more fun to buy new fabric than it is to use them. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. I also went to an antique shop today, which I probably shouldn't have done given those mentioned deadlines, but I thought there was going to be vintage clothing there, and I've kind of been on a vintage clothing buying spree recently. So I've been good about not buying fabric. I haven't been as good about not adding to my wardrobe. I was pretty good in December and January, but in February I've just come across a lot of pieces that I love, and I've ended up buying quite a few dresses. So if you'd like to see a clothing haul and styling haul of original vintage items, then please let me know. I know I kind of abandoned the Venturing into Vintage series that I started last year, and I'd intended to do a lot more for that, but I just kind of ran out of ideas that I felt were still relevant to the other content on my channel, and also ideas that I could film on my own, because I can't really do lookbooks on my own. But I could definitely do a haul and then show how I'd style those pieces if you guys are interested. I definitely slowed down my vintage clothing buying a lot after kind of mid-2018, just because my wardrobe was getting quite full. And I also started making pieces that I was happier with, so I felt less of a need to purchase things. But there's definitely still a place in my heart for true vintage blouses and dresses. And when I see one I love, it's hard for me to resist. And I've been following a lot of Instagram accounts who post a lot of things I love. Oh, I don't think I mentioned this, but now I'm just slip stitching the facing in. And I'm probably going to turn on some music while I do this, because I've chatted quite a lot so far. And my thread is tangled, so this might take a while. That is the collar finished and ironed. And for the other dress, I ended up closing it with a loop of elastic and a button. But for this one, I think I'm going to have a bow that ties around the collar, which will keep this portion closed. And I'm really happy with how this looks. I definitely did it properly. It's all been ironed and the interior looks nice and pretty. So now it is time to move on to adding the zipper. Now normally I like following the instructions on the actual zipper package, but because I've got these lapped seams that I want to line up perfectly, I'm actually going to machine baste the portion where the zipper will go closed. Then I'm going to sew the zipper on top of the seam, and then I'm going to open the seam up to reveal the teeth. And this isn't my preferred method generally, but I do think it's the best thing to do in this case. And I'm actually only going to do up the side that I'm going to put the zipper in, at least at first, because that's going to make it easier to flatten out the garment and to sew the zipper on, and also to iron around the zipper. Now I'm just going to open my zipper up. And I think this pattern called for an 8-inch closure, but I find side closures really difficult in general since I have quite large shoulders. So I'm going to let this portion be as long as my zipper is. So it's going to be 14 inches. I'm going to start there. And it's going to end there. So I'm going to sew to this point with a normal stitch length, then backstitch there, then sew this portion with a larger stitch length, then backstitch there, and then sew the rest of the seam normally. And that will allow me to easily remove the stitches here to reveal the teeth of the zipper later on. So I'm just going to go ahead and sew that, and then I will be back. Okay, so this is where the zipper needs to go. I'm just going to go ahead and lay the zipper so the teeth are right on top of the seam. So now I'm just going to sew around that with the zipper foot. Now I'm just going to take my seam marker And I'm going to open that portion to seam up. There we go. The zipper is done. It's kind of stiff. It's not broken and it's kind of loosening up as I test it, but it is pretty stiff by zipper standards, which is weird because it's a brand new one. Anyway, next up, I'm going to sew the other side seam and then I'm going to iron that. And this one doesn't have anything fiddly in it, so I just have to make sure that the lapped pieces line up. It's like this point is supposed to line up with this point. So I have to make sure that those are pinned together so those will match up after it's sewn, but that is really all I have to worry about. So here are the two dresses in all their glory. Don't mind me in the mirror with my curlers in because I'm about to photograph these, at least once I get them finished, because right now this one isn't done yet. I think last time I filmed I was sewing the zipper in, and then after I finished that I sewed up the other side seam. I also set the sleeves and sewed them on, and I showed the gathering process for the top of the sleeves earlier. And I usually don't like sleeves that are set with gathers because they're just very fiddly and I usually have to attempt them a couple times before I get them to look right. With this, the sleeve is gathered to set it, but it's very densely gathered over a small portion, so it's actually much easier to line up than most sleeves. And since I'm not binding any of the sleeves, once I did that, this dress was pretty much done. I decided that instead of wearing it with a belt, I'm going to wear it with some ribbon that matches the bows I made on the pockets. So I just have to use a lighter to cinch the edges of that so it won't fray. And if I had a little bit more ribbon left, I might try and do something fancier, but I barely have enough left to tie it around the waist in a bow, so I'm just going to leave it as is. I also have to hem this dress. I've already hemmed the white one and I let it hang for about 2 days before I got around to hemming it, and it didn't seem to warp at all. So I felt confident to go and right ahead with this dress and get it hemmed without leaving it to hang for a couple of days. So to hem this, I've just sewed some rayon binding across the bottom edge. And rayon binding used to be sold alongside bias binding. It can also be called hem tape. It's basically just a flexible, very thin tape that you can top stitch onto the edge and then use to cover the raw edge of the hem. So I folded that inward by about 2 inches just by eye, and now I'm going to sew that down with whip stitches. I did the exact same process for the white dress, as you can see here. I just used white binding for it, and then I sewed 3 bands of rickrack around the hem, and I just sewed these on by eye about 1 inch apart. So they're not perfectly even, but they're close enough, and it was much faster to do this by eye than to get it all marked out. I also just want to show you the rickrack that I used for this. I purchased it from an estate, and I don't know what they had against rickrack, but it isn't quite a state. I think it took me longer to unravel the amount I needed than it took to actually sew it on. This is the rickrack, by the way. I don't know what they had against rickrack, but this is very upsetting to me. I might include a satisfying time lapse at the end of this of me untangling it because there's nothing I want to do more right now than untangle this. It's so horrible to look at. But I need to hem that first. Speaking of rickrack, I decorated the pockets with a bit of rickrack and also a red button and a little bit of lace, which was also featured on the collar. I also have buttons going up the front of the dress, and then I put a button at the collar and a little loop of elastic so it can be closed and worn relatively high necked. And I didn't do that with this one because I actually like how it looks open. I think it takes on more of the shape of a heart and it's actually quite nice. I also sewed rickrack around the collar, and I believe I showed you that. And then I inserted some of that eyelet lace into or between the layers of the collar so it's nice and finished. There's also lace in the sleeve seam, which was shown on the pattern. And again, this is just more of that eyelet lace. And then I put some more rickrack around the hem of the sleeve. For the heart applique, I ended up backing a piece of pre-washed cotton sateen with double-sided fusible interfacing, or rather it's called fusible web. So it's basically like fusible interfacing, but both sides are sticky. So you iron it onto the fabric and then you can peel off the back and you can iron it and the piece of fabric that is stuck to it onto another piece of material. So that's what I did with the cotton sateen, and then I just outlined it with rickrack, and that was sewn on by machine, so it's nice and secure. And then I just went around the edge with some blanket stitches so it would sit really flush against the fabric. And I need to iron this and also clip some threads. But other than that, this dress is done, and this is going to be worn with a red belt. And then, as I said, this one just needs to be hemmed. So that is what is on my agenda for today. Then hopefully I can get both of these photographed. That is it for the construction footage, so let's dive right into the worn pictures. It's a little bit cold for these dresses right now, but I do think they both turned out really, really cute. Considering that I didn't make any mock-ups for this pattern, I am shocked with how well they fit. I really thought they were going to end up being too tight in the hips and too long-waisted for me, just based on the few try-on sessions that I did partway through, but the finished dresses are perfect. I really like how they look, and I think they're really flattering, especially when paired with the belt. These are a little bit on the cutesy side for my day-to-day fashion, but I do think I'm going to get a little bit of wear out of these dresses in the summer, and I think they're just really sweet and fun to look at, and I really enjoyed making them. These dresses went together remarkably well. I don't know if I was just in a good mood or if the pattern was that well made, but it went really smoothly, and as I said, I'm really happy with the end result. I do wish I'd had a slightly thicker white cotton for the white dress, so you couldn't see shadows of the seams through the material, but I also feel like it's a pretty historically accurate weight, since a lot of dresses from the mid-century were made out of incredibly light, even sheer cottons and worn with the slip. But overall, I really like these. I think the details on them are really cute, and I think considering it took about $40 worth of material in 2 days to make these, they turned out really well. So that is pretty much it for this video. I would love to know which one you like better, which one you would wear and want to add to your wardrobe, and if you're making anything Valentine's Day themed this year. But before I go, I just want to give a shout out and thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who make making videos possible on this channel. I'll have a whole bunch of their names on screen, but I just want to give a special shout out to my top tier patrons, which are Jordan Carpenter, Heidi Nizer, Tabitha Langston, Steffi S, Dot Cosplay, Mo Quintana, Rachel Bishop, and Sharon Cyrus. And they aren't part of the top tier, but they've been incredibly generous in the lower tiers, so I also want to give a thank you to Christina Lott, Janet Abbott, and Carol Jennings. Thank you so much for the support, I really appreciate it, and I will talk to all of you guys in another video very soon.